Have you ever wondered what happens when two worlds that should never meet suddenly collide? At one table in a bustling school cafeteria, a lonely daughter of a powerful billionaire CEO quietly carries her perfect lunch. At another table, a poor boy sits with nothing more than a piece of bread, hiding the weight of his family's tragedy. By chance, winter's chill left no empty seats. And so, the two found themselves side by side. What began as a simple act of sharing food grew into something no one expected, something far more valuable than money. But how could this fragile friendship survive when whispers, prejudice, and even illness threatened to tear it apart? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe kindness can truly bridge the gap between wealth and poverty? The winter afternoon pressed heavily upon the city, snowflakes drifting against the tall glass windows of the elementary school where the cafeteria hummed with laughter, clattering trays, and the faint aroma of soup. Emily, a slender 7-year-old girl with pale skin, chestnut brown hair tied into a neat ribbon, and large gray eyes that always seemed to wander without focus, carried her lunch tray carefully across the room. She was the daughter of Catherine Reed, a celebrated billionaire CEO known for her ruthless brilliance in the boardroom. And though Emily's shoes shone and her uniform was perfectly ironed, she moved like a shadow among the other children. They admired her from a distance, whispered in corners, but no one came close. She was too untouchable, too different. And in her small chest, a loneliness gnawed silently. Her tray held hot soup, golden chicken strips, and fresh fruit that steamed faintly in the cold air. Yet she felt no appetite. She longed for laughter, for someone to share even one joke. But day after day, the bench beside her remained empty. That day, however, as she scanned the crowded room, she saw every table filled. Every table except for one at the far edge, where a boy sat alone, with nothing but a crust of bread wrapped in a paper napkin. Daniel was thin, with sandy blonde hair falling unevenly over his forehead and deep blue eyes that held a sadness far too old for his 8 years. His shirt sleeves were slightly frayed. His posture stooped as though carrying weight no child should bear. He ate slowly, as if stretching each bite to last. Emily paused, clutching her tray, unsure why her chest tightened at the sight of him. Then, without thinking further, she walked toward him, her footsteps echoing softly on the linoleum floor. She pulled out the chair beside him, the one no one else had dared to claim. The bench creaked beneath her slight frame as Daniel lifted his eyes in surprise. Emily sat, but she herself did not yet understand why. The cafeteria noise swelled around them. But at the corner table where the two children sat, silence lingered like a fragile thread. Daniel shifted uneasily, clutching the crust of bread in his small hands. His sandy blonde hair fell across his forehead, hiding part of his expression. But the hollowness in his cheeks betrayed how little he had eaten in recent days. The bread was stale, dry, yet he chewed slowly, determined to make it last. Inside, shame burned against his ribs. He hated when others noticed how poor he was, how little he had compared to the polished trays around the room. Emily sat beside him, her gray eyes darting from her steaming bowl of soup to his napkin-wrapped meal. She felt a tug she could not name, part guilt, part empathy, part a strange longing to bridge the vast gap between them. For a moment she hesitated, her fork hovering above golden chicken strips. Then, with a quiet breath, she slid her tray toward him. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice was gentle. "Would you eat with me?" Daniel froze. No one had ever offered him anything at school. Since his father's death, a desperate act that left their family shattered, he had learned to shrink into corners, to draw no attention. His mother worked long hours, doing laundry, scrubbing floors, patching clothes, all for wages that barely covered rent. He had promised her he would study hard, that his scholarship would be enough. But hunger was harder to hide than determination. His blue eyes lifted to Emily's face, uncertain, guarded. Then he saw no pity, only sincerity. She tore her chicken strip in half and nudged it toward him. Daniel's throat tightened. He whispered, "With you?" Emily nodded, her lips curving into a shy smile. And for the first time, Daniel did not feel invisible. Outside, the snow piled higher each morning, coating the schoolyard in white silence. But inside the cafeteria, something began to shift. Emily and Daniel, though seated at separate desks during lessons, found themselves gravitating toward the same corner table when the lunch bell rang. The first time had felt like chance, the second like courage, and by the third, it had already grown into a quiet routine. Emily would place her tray down with the confidence of habit, brushing back strands of chestnut hair as her gray eyes lit up the moment Daniel arrived. She spoke more freely now, telling stories about her mansion, a vast house with echoing marble floors, endless rooms she never dared to enter, and a nanny who fussed over her every move but never laughed at her jokes. "Sometimes," she confessed, "I feel like I live in a museum." The words tasted strange on her tongue, heavy with the longing to be understood. Daniel listened, his blue eyes steady, then replied in a low voice about his world. The rented apartment with walls thin as paper, the leaking roof that dripped onto tin buckets during storms, and his mother, her hands red and cracked from cleaning, who still smiled each night and told him he was her pride. He did not speak of shame, only of endurance, as though hardship itself was stitched into his skin. For Emily, hearing his life was like stepping into warmth. For Daniel, hearing her secrets was like being treated as an equal, not a charity case. At that little table, their differences blurred. For the first time, Emily felt seen as a child, not as the billionaire's daughter, and Daniel felt heard as himself, not as the poor boy with bread. The wind howled outside that morning, rattling the classroom windows as Daniel slipped into his seat, his head bowed low. His eyes were red and swollen, his movements sluggish, as though every step carried the weight of something too heavy to speak aloud. Emily noticed immediately. She had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of his presence, but today the silence felt different, sharper, almost suffocating. At lunch, she found him at their table, staring at his untouched bread. "Daniel," she whispered, her gray eyes searching his face. "What happened?" For a moment, he did not answer. His throat worked as though words were stones lodged inside. Finally, in a halting voice, he confessed, "It's my sister, Sarah. She's 14. The doctors, they say she has a disease that won't go away." His blue eyes filled again, shimmering with the kind of fear no child should have to carry. Emily's hand froze above her tray. She knew sickness only as something cured by quick visits to private clinics, by medicine her mother's wealth could buy without thought. To imagine a world where illness meant despair instead of healing, it unsettled her to her core. Daniel's voice dropped lower. "We sold everything, our furniture, even my father's old guitar. But it's still not enough. My mom says I may need to quit school. The scholarship pays for books, not for life." His hands clenched tightly around the napkin, knuckles white, as if holding onto it might stop everything from falling apart. Emily could not find the right words. All she could do was reach across the table, her small fingers closing around his trembling hand. She gripped it tightly, as if to promise silently what her lips could not yet say. That evening, the Reed mansion glowed with sterile light, its marble floors gleaming, its hallways hushed as always. Emily sat at the long dining table, her spoon moving idly through untouched soup. Across from her, Catherine Reed Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, her dark hair pulled back into a severe knot, scanned through emails on her tablet. She was a woman admired and feared in the business world, praised for her decisiveness and her icy composure. Yet as Emily shifted uneasily, Catherine finally looked up. "What is it?" Her voice was firm, clipped as if cutting through a boardroom argument. Emily's gray eyes brimmed with tears. She hesitated, then blurted, "Daniel's sister is sick." "They don't have money. He might have to leave school." The words tumbled out, raw and unpolished. Catherine's brows knit together. "Emily," she said sharply, "you shouldn't involve yourself in such matters." "It's not our responsibility." She set the tablet aside, her jaw tight, her tone final. But when she glanced back at her daughter, the sight pierced her. A small girl clutching her spoon, lips trembling, eyes glistening with desperate plea. For a long moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked softly. The snow pressed against the glass windows. And something inside Catherine stirred, a memory she had buried. Later that night, alone in her study, she stood by the frosted window, watching snowflakes fall in endless silence. She thought of her own childhood in a cramped apartment, of nights when hunger gnawed and loneliness whispered. She thought of Emily, sitting in a mansion filled with everything except warmth. Her chest tightened. By morning, the decision was made. Catherine signed a check with swift precision and placed a call. Daniel's mother would be given steady work at her company quietly, without announcement. The first signs of change came quietly, like the thaw of ice beneath heavy snow. Sarah was admitted to the hospital, her frail body now under the care of doctors who spoke in calm, measured tones that carried both gravity and promise. For Daniel, the knowledge that his sister had medicine, that she would not simply fade before his eyes, was like air rushing back into his lungs. Each evening he visited her, clutching her hand, whispering that school was going well, that things would be all right. At home, their mother, now dressed in a modest gray uniform provided by Catherine's company, left for work each morning with steadier steps. The exhaustion in her eyes did not vanish, but it softened, replaced by a fragile pride. For the first time in months, she could pay rent on time and bring home groceries without counting every coin. Daniel watched her with a quiet awe, realizing she no longer carried the same weight alone. Back at school, Daniel remained reserved, but his posture changed. He lifted his head more often, the slump in his shoulders less pronounced. Emily noticed, and her heart swelled each time she saw the flicker of relief on his face. When they sat together at lunch, the air between them felt lighter, as though they shared not only food, but a victory. Whispers still circled in the cafeteria, but their tone was different. Where once there had been mockery, now there was curiosity, even admiration. Other children glanced at Emily and Daniel with something closer to respect. Their friendship, once ridiculed, had become something unshakable, something others could not ignore. The snow melted in patches across the playground, revealing damp earth and the faint green of new grass. Spring sunlight spilled over the benches, softer and warmer than it had felt in months. For Emily and Daniel, the rhythm of sharing lunch had become as natural as breathing. Yet today, something in the air carried a brightness that neither could ignore. Emily sat with her tray balanced on her knees, her gray eyes catching the shimmer of sunlight reflected in Daniel's hair. She thought back to the first time she had seen him, hunched over a crust of bread, and a quiet ache rose in her chest. She realized how much he had changed, how his shoulders no longer seemed crushed by invisible weight. how his eyes held hope instead of only sorrow. But more than that, she realized how much she had changed too. For years she had lived surrounded by wealth but starved of closeness. She remembered empty rooms in her mansion, the echo of her footsteps on marble floors, the silence that money could never soften. And now here she was, on a worn wooden bench, sharing food with a boy whose presence filled the spaces that had once felt endless. She smiled, the words slipping from her lips almost without thought. "I used to think I had everything," she whispered. "But really, I had nothing, until I had a friend like you." Daniel lowered his gaze, his hands tightening around the small piece of bread Emily had broken and given to him. His chest swelled with a warmth he had not known for so long. Looking up, his blue eyes glimmered with quiet conviction. Friendship, he now believed, could warm even the longest winter. In the quiet after every storm, we are reminded that miracles do not always come with thunder or fire. Sometimes they arrive in the form of a shared meal, a gentle hand held in silence, or the courage of a child who chooses kindness over fear. Just as Emily and Daniel discovered, God's grace often works through the smallest acts, turning loneliness into love and despair into hope. May this story inspire us to see miracles hidden in our everyday lives. Share this story, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel so together we can spread kindness. May God bless you and your family.